Hello Internet, and welcome to episode 3 of Skill Check. Today we'll be talking about dynamic combat. I'm also going to be pairing this episode with a video of Minecraft in order to further explain what I'm going to be talking about. Okay, so dynamic combat. Dynamic combat is something that DMs struggle with in the beginning. It's something that I also struggled with until one of my players pointed out a few tips that would help out make the encounters more interesting. And I really took it to heart and started using it because it is indeed a very good idea. So the things in dynamic combat that we're going to be going over are things like target priority, realistic tactics used by the encounters, using cover, and encounter diversity. But before we get into all that, let's go into what new DMs usually make as a mistake on their first or even 10th session. So here I'm going to be using Minecraft as an example. We're in a super flat world. For those of you who are just listening, hopefully you'll be able to understand everything. I'll explain it as clear and concise as possible. So, starting off with new DMs, I'm going to be using 3 colors of wool here to represent some players. We'll have the blue as like a fighter or a barbarian or some sort of combat melee, and the other 2 will be, have pink as a cleric and orange here as a sorcerer or wizard. Now what new DMs usually have is they'll have, say, a bunch of the same monster, or even a couple of, slightly varying, like kobolds and goblins or whatever. And those are represented by the creeper heads here. If you listened to last episode, I was speaking about using Minecraft as a tool and using heads as a representation for enemies, and wool carpets for players. I'm using wool blocks here because we do not have any other environment to obstruct any views, so it'll be fine. So normally what GMs would do, or DMs, sorry, I've been reading a lot on the internet and a lot of people use GM. So what a lot of DMs would do would have these enemies here just move straight up and attack the closest thing to them, while the other, like the sorcerer here, would back up and cast his spells from afar. But if you're playing in a edition like 3.5, you know that magic always hits, so really, when you're looking at this encounter, like, would all of these enemies just rush at the first person they see? And that's how we'll get into target priority. Depending on what your party is fighting, if these are, say, a bunch of orcs or humanoids, and they have brains in their heads, they know how to think, do you think that they would realistically attack the one character who is all dressed up in plate mail, wielding, let's say a big tower shield and sword? Do you think that they would all rush at him, given that he is the one with the most armor and, the hardest to kill? My answer, no, they wouldn't run all at him. Maybe they'd have a couple like so to flank him and keep him occupied, but the other ones would go for the larger threat and the more squishy person, which would be your caster. If your group doesn't have, a wizard or a sorcerer, it'd just be, the more squishy people who deal the most damage but, die quickly. Because even you in your right mind, if you were going up against 3 different enemies, would you choose the person wearing, regular clothing, or the person who is a walking tank? Kind of an easy answer there. However, that would only realistically apply to enemies who can actually, think about their target and target priority. Otherwise, if these were all, say, wolves, they would probably just rush the closest people they can, because they don't think of, things like that. They don't understand that, this guy is going to be harder to kill than those guys. They just see them all as, people and food. So, using things like, humanoids and beasts, that would, it would make a difference in your target priority in your encounters. Target priority is something that players often really find annoying, because if you are constantly targeting one character, players know when they're being picked on. But if you're using something like target priority in a combat encounter, it's only fair game. If someone is constantly being picked on, like the caster, it's only realistic. You're not picking on him so much as you're, attacking him in a realistic encounter. And that would bring us to tactics. Once again, with beasts and humanoids, they act differently in certain environments. So let's build us a little tunnel here. Let's go 3 wide for the sake of this example. So you're in a tunnel. You're in a cave or a dungeon. Maybe you're in a hallway or something in a building. Now, if you have our fighter or barbarian, let's say, and he's right here in the middle of this tunnel, which is 3 squares wide. And then you have your caster and cleric behind. Whoops, that's not the right one. There we are. So you have your caster and cleric behind. Realistically, let me just set this to so you can see a little better. Realistically, when you have, let's say, this is a big open room and you have a ridiculous amount of enemies. If these are, say, orcs, are they really going to funnel in here like this? Because if they walk, try to move anywhere past the barbarian or fighter, they're just going to incur attacks of opportunity. Their numbers now mean nothing, since they're all blocked here at the front. They can't physically get to the casters, and the casters can just sit here and pummel away with their magic. If these were beasts or wolves, then yes, this is probably what they would do. They would probably just run in here mindlessly until, a sufficient number of them has been slain for the rest of the pack to decide that, hey, maybe these guys are, too dug in to make a difference, so let's cheese it. Now, if these were humanoids, they wouldn't even attempt this. If, say these are all orcs. Orcs are, brutish, warring people. They understand that if they walk right in there, they're just gonna die. So they would either stay out here or try to find a way around their enemy here, which would be the players, or they would just flee and maybe set up an ambush elsewhere. But they would not, for any reason, come in here and just get massacred while these, casters are attacking and they can't even hit this big, metal person. So it's things like that are good to think about to make encounters a little bit more realistic and maybe a little bit more, thought engaging. You have to think about what you're gonna do. Like if these guys run away, well, now you have to think, well, the players, that is, they have to think, are they gonna be set up for us somewhere else in the dungeon waiting to ambush us from somewhere? Or are they just gonna flee completely? You never know with these things. But yeah, once again, humanoids would flee, beasts would probably just run in here until enough of them have been slain that they would find it a lost cause and also flee. Okay, let's just destroy our little set here. Now, another thing that I had never even thought about until it was brought up was being attacked from cover. So let's say this is a wall. Okay. The players are trying to get into, I don't know, a town or some sort of hostile encampment. Now, on top of this wall are crenulations, or some sort of blockade or barrier, where the enemies are standing behind with bows, arrows, other ranged weaponry. And your players are down here, at the bottom of the wall. Now, first of all, the enemies here have high ground, so they would all get a bonus to AC, but more importantly, oh, you can't even see them from down here, that's okay. But more importantly, they would have cover. Now it's up to the DM to decide how much these crenulations cover the enemy by. If it's 50%, 70%, whatever. And when these players attack up here at these enemies, first they have to take the penalty for their for being high ground and attacking up from the bottom, but they also have to roll a percentile dice and see if they even make the hit to pass the cover, or shoot through cover, or over it, whatever. This makes encounters a lot more interesting because, say, you know, your party rolls up on this encampment, and they're under 75% cover, and there's more enemies than there are players. So now it becomes, you know, a real challenge. The players want to try to attack this wall when they could be, you know, turned into pincushions by all these arrows, or do they want to try to find another entrance, maybe a tunnel underneath the wall? Maybe they want to climb it somewhere else where it's not so protected, maybe at night. Maybe at night they're watching the wall, seeing the patrols, and when there's no patrols there, they want to, you know, throw a grappling hook or a ladder or something, get over the wall. It brings for some different thought processes and makes not every encounter have to be the same, you know, hit back and forth. It can be more of, you know, like a puzzle. You can turn encounters into puzzles. And it's actually a lot of fun to have to do something like this rather than just a normal encounter that gets quite bland after a while. And the last thing that I thought was pretty important for dynamic combat was encounter diversity. If you have... I should probably stop breaking these. If you have your party here, and you're going up against some enemies, most new DMs would just have, you know, oh, you encounter, you know, 4 goblins, or you encounter 4 or 5 orcs, or whatever. Those are all the same enemy types. They're all melee, they're all the same thing. But what if, you know, you had your group of 4 goblins being headed by a big hobgoblin with a whip, or with a bow or something ranged, or maybe he's magic. So now you have 2 different types of threats to worry about. You have a melee threat that will be, you know, blocking in and being used as shock troopers to, you know, slow the party down, while the hobgoblin is at the back, you know, doing exactly what your party is doing to the enemies. You have your melee or your tank, and then you have your damage dealing range people. So that's just one more thing. It's a simple concept, but one that doesn't get used too often by new DMs, just for the fact that they don't think of it. They think that, you know, wait, I have an encounter to do now, so I've got to you know, I've got to put in so many enemies of this type, or, you know, my party is this level, so I'll take, oh, these guys look cool, and I'll just, you know, throw in a bunch of them. That should be a difficult encounter. But when in reality, a more difficult encounter would be 4 or 5 melee units, plus say maybe a healer unit and a ranged, or 2 or 3 ranged and 2 or 3 melee units. So combat diversity is a big key in the dynamics of combat. So I hope that was informative. We went over some mistakes made by new DMs. We went over target priority and the differences between humans and beasts when you're fighting in an encounter and what they would think, and the tactics of humanoids or beasts. Because frankly, a humanoid wouldn't, they're not stupid unless they're ogres or something. But otherwise, they're not just gonna, run in blindly and, run to their deaths. Using cover was another fun one. I definitely recommend taking that. If you don't take any other tip from this episode, I would say use cover, because it makes things a lot more realistic and a lot more entertaining and more of a challenge or puzzle for the combat. And encounter diversity. So, I hope this was informative. Like and share if you found that it was, and I will see you next time. Take it easy.